Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker.
What the
That's right, folks. Peter Parker.
So it's been a few months since the release of No Way Home, and with everything that's happened in this groundbreaking movie, it's suffice to say that Peter Parker's life in the MCU will never be the same again. Looking back at this movie, it not only establishes but also wraps up MCU Spider-Man's origins. It shows how far Tom's Peter Parker has come and all the trials and tribulations he's had to go through. This movie certainly had the whole fandom gripping their seats in anticipation. Rewatching all the trailers and the movie itself was fun and all, but not once did I ever think the film would come to this sort of conclusion. Peter's identity has been completely erased from the minds of millions, so now he's practically a new person with a fresh, clean slate, which leaves the door open to many more storylines that could be adapted into Tom's next trilogy as the Wallcrawler. Multiple Spider-Men were featured in this film, to no one's surprise, due to the leaks and whatnot, but that certainly didn't take away the magic from seeing these two legends pop up on the big screen in their iconic suits after many years. Seeing how Sony and Marvel were able to pull this off, something that we've been practically begging for years now, actually happened, was a dream come true, and they made it work almost effortlessly. A key thing that not a lot of people notice is that Tom's Spider-Man seems to take something from his experience meeting and fighting alongside the two Peters, hence Tom's new Spidey suit he wears at the last minute of the film. As you can clearly see, he reverts back to the classic red and blue color theme with fewer tech patterns and a lot more of a homemade style to it. Perfect. But we can't forget all the sneaky cameos that showed up in the film. Most notably Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock, aka Venom. Just before Eddie and Venom get teleported away, we see a small piece of the symbiote left behind, which of course leaves the door open to Peter running into the symbiote. Eventually, but who really knows? Sony and Marvel can get together and go multiple directions with what No Way Home sets up, and what I had planned for this video today was basically to throw out some ideas for what could possibly be next for MCU Spidey. I'm not the first to talk about this, and I certainly won't be the last. In fact, this video was inspired by several other YouTubers giving their opinions on where the next Spider-Man trilogy is headed. Before we get started to talk about 4, 5 and 6, let's briefly talk about number 3, No Way Home. What does No Way Home mean for Spider-Man's journey in the MCU? Well, two things come to mind. One, this has been one giant origin story that has finally been concluded. From the start in Captain America Civil War all the way up to No Way Home. Now I can tell what some of you are already thinking, but his story starts in Homecoming, what are you on about? No, not exactly. Peter's story begins the moment Tony recruits him in Civil War. As Tony rightly says, he was a dumpster diver, searching for scraps and using his powers a little recklessly but for good intentions. Obviously, being young and living in the world of superheroes, he's gonna look up to the Avengers, Earth's mightiest. So along comes Tony and bam, he's an Avenger. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. From Civil War up till I would say Endgame, Tom's Spider-Man was so focused on being an Avenger, it never truly felt like he was truly Spider-Man. At moments we got that in Homecoming, and others we took steps back like in Far From Home. But Far From Home does explore one aspect of Peter, which is the idea of his freedom. He wants to go on a trip with his classmates, he wants to put that superhero life aside for a few days, but he can never truly escape that responsibility he's cursed with. So, as a result of trying to get what he wants, he now has to deal with the consequences of that in No Way Home. Secondly, I can say with confidence that Tom's Peter Parker finally feels like he's become Spider-Man. It feels as if the movie has helped Tom Spider-Man find his footing in the MCU, move him out of the Iron Boy Jr. trope, and help him grow from Spider-Boy to Spider-Man. The ending of No Way Home highlights this excellently. We see him in his very familiar setting, crappy apartment, completely independent, no fancy tech, just this average working class guy who now has to juggle this superhero identity life on his own. That's peak Peter Parker, that's peak Spider-Man, that's just peak everything. So, sequels, new trilogy, new storylines, new heroes, new villains, the works. Everything in 4, 5 and 6 needs to be new. Stuff like retaining the same scope level throughout the movies, which the Home trilogy failed to do. I feel like we've seen everything we could get out of Spider-Man when it comes to the cosmic and magical side of the MCU. So it's time for a more grounded story. Along with that comes grounded stakes, heroes, villains, but most importantly, a grounded Spider-Man. One that is more focused on being New York's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man rather than being Earth's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. It's all about returning to the roots, the core of who Spider-Man is and where he thrives. But what if the problem he faces is not up in space or from another dimension, but in fact in his own backyard? Enter the Mafia. I think a Mafia-centered storyline for the next batch of Spider-Man movies would be perfect. Fighting crime is what Spider-Man is best known for, well, of course, he's a fucking superhero. But my opinion still stands. Some of Spidey's best comic book storylines are where he's dealing with organized crime in New York City. This leaves the door open to many directions Sony and Marvel can take with this character and his story. All the foes that he could face, all the allies he can make, the possibilities are almost endless. Now I stress almost because I've made a list of all the likely possible villains and heroes we could see pop up in the trilogy. Firstly, let's go with the villains. Number 1 has got to be Kingpin. He's commonly known as a Daredevil villain, but he was originally a Spider-Man villain. Seeing the big guy go up against the Wallcrawler would be fun to see and would work well with the whole Mafia storyline, since Kingpin controls most crime in New York. This also opens up the possibility of a Daredevil team-up. Next is Hammerhead, another crime boss who isn't as popular as Kingpin but just as deadly. Hammerhead has this growth on his forehead which makes it solid and durable, basically metal, and is an intimidating figure in the crime industry. Next, I would really like to see Tombstone. Tombstone isn't that well known of a villain since he's not as high up in the crime boss rankings, but unlike Kingpin and Hammerhead, he's actually got abilities such as superhuman strength, stamina, durability with a high level resistance to injury and razor sharp teeth. So basically he's like Luke Cage but ugly. Next I was gonna say Scorpion, but Venom is the obvious candidate here since the ending of No Way Home perfectly sets up a meeting between Peter and Venom, and we could see a more aggressive and rage driven Spider-Man due to the mafia issues in New York. And finally, and this one's gonna surprise some of you, but I look back on the Insomniac game and you know who I'd really like to see in the MCU, and this will benefit Sony and Marvel who might want to bump up the VFX budget. I would really like to see Mr. Negative. I think he works well in this setting, his powers are pretty cool, and it will be interesting to see who they would cast as Martin Lee in the MCU. As for the heroes, the first person I could think of was Daredevil. I fucking love Daredevil, and you can imagine my excitement seeing him appear in No Way Home for a brief cameo, but it was integrated so well and left many of us hoping for more. Plus, if Kingpin is involved, I don't see how they cannot use Daredevil again. Next up is Black Cat. With all the crime going on, this would be the perfect opportunity to introduce the Black Cat and have her mess with Spider-Man as he tries to take down the multiple crime bosses across New York. She's more of an anti-hero, so at times, if her interests align with Spider-Man's, I could see her working together with Spidey. Plus, there's a chance of her becoming a potential love interest. Once again, I gotta add Venom to the mix since he is also an anti-hero, but that's only been when the symbiote is possessing Flash Thompson, but who knows how they can go about showing that, but it's definitely a possibility. Now I realize I said I would like to keep this trilogy grounded, but let's just say the Fantastic Four aren't exactly a grounded superhero team, but Spider-Man has teamed up with them several times in the comics, and they are based in New York City as well, so I figured I could add them to the list as well. Lastly, I think Deadpool would be my final choice. Ryan Reynolds has yet to make his big debut as the 𝗪𝗏𝗪, and fans would absolutely lose it if Spider-Man and Deadpool were to team up on the big screen. So it could happen. Deadpool deals with crooks all the time, and this could lead to Spider-Man running into him. As I said, they can go anywhere with this, but I think a grounded take on Spider-Man is needed once again to move away from the already developed and established MCU origin and have a much more mature and experienced Spider-Man swinging around protecting New York City. I'm really glad the concept of No Way Home was possible and all the opportunities that arise, and I'm really glad that Tom's sticking around for another trilogy to cement his name in the Spider-Man legacy, and I can't wait to see more movies to come. But hey, I would very much like to hear what you guys think about this as well. Where do you see Spider-Man in the future? What kind of heroes or villains will pop up? Let me know in the comment section below, and like the video of course, it helps out the algorithm to get this video noticed. Before you go, I have a Twitter. Please go follow me over there if you liked the video. Subscribe if you're new. I also have a Patreon that I set up not too long ago. If you could support me on there as well, I would really appreciate it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you hopefully soon.